Like many of us junk journalers, I love collecting vintage tins. Mostly I find these at flea markets if I'm really lucky. And I'm most happy about these two because they are actually Egyptian. My hubby is from Egypt, so these are super special. I don't know if I could ever find something like this in Egypt actually. But they're just gorgeous. I love this one as well. The shape is just adorable. And all I have in here are these tiny eyelets. One day I might make a journal out of this as well. In this one I store some wintry looking sequins. And this one I just emptied out because this is the one I want to use to make a little journal. If you're thinking now, great Barbara, I love that you have this beautiful tin, but I don't have a tin like this. How can I make a journal like this? So if you don't have a tin you want to use, and obviously it doesn't have to be this size, use what you have. You could even use a round one because that would be fun as well. And you can then adapt the steps that I'm going to show you. But if you don't have any tins and you want to make this, just go on, for example, Amazon and type in Altoid tin empty and you will find tons of options. It will show you not only Altoid tins, but other kinds of tins. And obviously they will not look vintage, but you could make them vintage by sanding them down, by using some alcohol inks. Get creative, you will find solutions. I definitely will not be covering up this beautiful cover, but if you have one of those blank Altoid tins, obviously you could just make a beautiful collage on the top or just add a digital that you have cut down to the size of your box. So many solutions here. I want my little journal to be part of the tin. So I want it to be connected with the tin. I don't want it to be a separate journal that uses the tin as a box. I want my journal fixed in here so that we can open it, but so that it's part of the tin. I hope that makes sense. It will once we start. So let's put these away. I really cannot wait to make a little one for this one as well. I think the biggest challenge about making a journal for a tin is that you have to keep it to this measurement of the height of your box. It cannot be larger, including all of the embellishments and everything you make. So that's something we really need to watch. I was thinking about what kind of pages should I use, and I looked around my desk and I found this envelope here. Why not just cut this down and use this for my pages? It feels like it has approximately maybe 100 GSM. So again, use what you have at home. Maybe you have packaging paper or you have different kinds of envelopes. So I'm going to start off by cutting this envelope apart so that I can make pages from it. I'm going to use my large paper trimmer to trim around all of the edges so that I have single sheets. Obviously, you can also do that with scissors. So I have two single sheets now, which I'm later going to cut up into pages for my journal. But for now, I'm going to work on them as two full sheets. And since the surface is quite porous in my case, I am going to add some clear gesso just to make sure that the liquid mediums that I add will not completely soak in, but will stay more on the surface of the paper. This is optional depending on your paper. If you don't have a clear gesso, you could also use maybe white gesso and just put a thin coat on it. Whoops. I want to add this blue one here. I don't know if this is still available. This one has a pretty strong tooth on it, so it has a lot of texture, very sandy. I know not everybody likes this. I happen to like this kind of texture. This will of course also strengthen my paper a little bit. And I'm going to add this to the front and the back of both sheets. Just a very thin layer. So once I have both of my papers covered in the clear gesso and dried, before I add any liquid mediums, I'm going to do a resist technique by using embossing powder. I'm going to use clear embossing powder. And since I love combining vintage with modern, I'm going to use this stamp set by Stampers Anonymous and Tim Holtz. It's one from his newest release and it's called Paint by Numbers CMS 483. I will link this below. First, I considered using a larger stamp because I want the stamping to go all over all of my pages. But then I realized I can just use this as a large stamp as it is, which is super convenient. So choose any stamp you have. Either you have large ones or you maybe want to combine different stamps, whatever you want to do. And if you don't have the ability to emboss, skip this step completely. You don't have to have this to do this project. You can just continue with the step after this one. So I'm going to use my Distress Embossing Dabber. I prefer this to my embossing stamp pad because this is very juicy and I think my stamp pads need some refreshing, which I haven't done yet. So once I have the gel on all of my stamps, I'll go ahead and place these on my envelope. Yes, I think that worked great. So let's add the clear embossing powder quickly before this dries. I hope I have enough embossing powder. This requires a lot. I wasn't considering that. This is all I have. I think I need more embossing powder, especially given how much I've been using this. So this will obviously also work if you don't have the clear gesso on it. You can just directly stamp on your surface as well. I am not sure why these parts here are darker. I think these are parts where I don't have enough clear gesso on them. It's definitely not the embossing powder. But in any case, I love the way it looks. So all of these are shiny now. Now we'll continue with the same process on both sheets, if I can manage with the amount of embossing powder that I have, and cover both of these completely. So I have both front pages done with the numbers, and actually this alone would already make such a great background. And if you want to be more intentional about these beautiful color variations, then maybe don't add your clear gesso evenly, because I think it looks really cool. And here we can see on the 6 and the 0, we also have a little bit of black because I have used these two numbers. Even though I've used them with my permanent archival ink, apparently the embossing dabber made some of the ink come off. So just beware in case you don't want any variation to clean your stamps well before. I'm embracing it because it just adds to the grunge. I love it. And I also just changed my mind about the back sides. One thing to also mention is if you do not add clear gesso, once we add liquid media, it will probably go through to the other side. So that's something to keep in mind. So for the back side, I decided I do want to change up the design just to have a little more variation. So I'm going to use this one that I originally considered. Stampers Anonymous, Tim Holtz, Floral Trims CMS 461. I will link this for you as well. And even though I do have enough clear embossing powder, it does take a lot less than you think. I'm going to switch it up as well and use my Distress Embossing Glaze Pumice Stone. So hopefully we'll get a very different result on these pages. I'm super curious. Again, I'm just going to leave the trims on the packaging. That just makes sense to me. Two more things I just thought about while dabbing this on is, first of all, please always store this on its head so that the gel can run into the cushion on the top, or in this case on the bottom. And the second thing is a workaround if you don't have the clear embossing but you wanted to do this. Let me just think this way. Let's do it this way. Would be to only stamp on one side and do the liquid media only on one side, and then glue those two papers together, which would make your paper more sturdy, which is probably a good thing. These are, of course, going to be a lot thinner lines. They're a lot more detailed. I'm very curious what this will look like. Oh yeah, this looks gorgeous. So this is what it looks like once the full page is done. The cool thing about this particular design is that these patterns are seamless. So you can stamp it once here and then you can stamp it here, and if you manage to line them up, it will be a continuous design, which is very cool. Another thing I'd like to say is, if you are looking to invest in embossing tools, I highly recommend using a heat tool like this rather than a heat tool like this. Because with this one, this is actually called heat gun. This one is great for embossing because it gets very hot very quickly. But this one is not good for drying splatters, for example, because it blows the air out so strongly that it will blow your splatters all over your page. Whereas this one has more like a softer airflow. It's hot enough to emboss, but it also is great for drying splatters on your page. I did not know this could emboss before I got it, so hopefully this will help you with your decisions. I also have a video on my channel sharing my favorite junk journal tools. I will link that below for you in case you are interested and have not seen it. So we have two double-sided papers, which I want to continue to decorate. So I'm going to start off with this side here with the numbers. Gloves are on, it's going to get messy. We're going to use Distress Oxide sprays. If you don't have any sprays, but you have ink pads, you can also just smoosh your ink pads onto a surface, spritz some water, and dip your paper into that. So my palette are neutral colors, and I'm going to start with light and keep going darker. So my first one is Picket Fence. Love this one so much. It's white. And since I have the clear gesso on my paper, this is really going to help spread the oxide rather than immediately sinking into the paper. You could, of course, spray this through a stencil, but I'm just going to spray it directly on here. That looks lovely. I'm just going to put this aside. I'm going to do exactly the same thing on this next sheet. I will dry this and then we move on to the next color. The point of having a clear gesso on it is, of course, so that we can wipe it off. So I'm going to just add some water to a cloth. You can also use kitchen paper, and this should now come off all of the embossed parts. I should probably just do this at the end, actually. Don't have to do it after every step, I'm just realizing. So we already see the effect a little bit here, but we will see it more the more colors we add. So I always do the same thing with the second sheet. On this second sheet, I'm not going to wipe away the oxide from the numbers because we'll just do that at the end. And I'm also not drying this completely. Some of the paint is still a little bit damp, and I'm hoping this will mix with the next layer that we add. So let's go back to our first sheet and let's add some frayed burlap. So this one, I don't want to add too much of. So the darker we get, the less I want to add. I actually forgot I wanted to add Lost Shadow first because that is a lot lighter. And I didn't dry it in between. Let's just have the colors mix a bit. And lastly, I want to add some walnut stain. I lied, we need some gold. I'll use this one by Seth Apter. It's an ice ink dye spray called Goldmine. Again, I did not dry in between. I want these to mix. So this will just kind of hopefully give it a nice gold shimmer. I let these air dry. You could also dry them with the heat gun. And now I'm actually just going to use kitchen towel and wipe off the paint from the embossing powder. So you can see the difference here is where I've wiped them off. Although you can see it doesn't completely come off, interestingly. I'm not sure why that is, but it's coming off enough so that we can really see them compared to here where I haven't wiped it off at all. So here we see a good comparison. This one is obviously done and this one is not. There's a huge difference. So I'll do the same thing with the second one. So I've cleaned all of the numbers off. I think these papers look fabulous. And I also added a matte spray film on top just to seal in the distress oxides, because oftentimes when you touch the oxides afterwards, they rub off on your fingers. So that will prevent that. And I also decided that I'm not doing anything else with the back here. I think they're beautiful as they are, and especially once they're cut down, I think it'll be a nice contrast to have one side like this and one side like this. So next we need to figure out the size for our pages. And by the way, let me give you the measurements of these because I know you're going to ask. In centimeters, it's 7 centimeters wide or 3¼ inches, about 10.2 centimeters long or almost 4¼ inches. And the height is 1½ centimeters or a little over ½ an inch. I'm taking some cardstock, which was left over from another project. I'm going to trace the bottom of my tin. Then I'm going to cut this out. I'll use my corner rounder for the corners. So let's make sure that this fits in here. No, it's too big. So I need to just cut it down a little bit more. Okay, we got it. So this is our template now, which I can use to cut all my pages now. So I'll just trace this and cut them down. And I'm assuming these are too many. It might actually be easier to just do this. And then we figure out the width. So mine is exactly 7 centimeters or 2¾ inches. And that way, I think that's a bit easier. And then at the end, I'll just round the corners. And actually, I can extend these. I don't know why I'm making my life so difficult. Just extend these down because obviously we can use them for the other cards. Oh no, you know what I did now? because I didn't put these all the way on the top. I'm not gonna have enough space for the bottom row. Ooh, oh my goodness, that just works out perfectly. I'll cut these down, I'll cut the other ones down, and we'll go from there. I have cut my papers into 16 equal pieces. And I decided I only need 8 of them. So I rounded corners only of 8. And as you can see, I stitched around them twice with a running stitch with my sewing machine. And I have also inked up the edges with ground espresso distress oxide. So we won't be needing these. I can save these for another project. And these 8 now fit in here beautifully, and they fit so that the tin, I would say, is filled up approximately halfway. Because of course the pages are going to get bulkier with embellishments. So next I'm going to hinge these pages together. And I've already prepared approximately 1-inch square pieces of fabric. Alternatively, you could use tape. If you use washi tape, please use extra glue on the washi, otherwise it will fall apart with time. And I want this to pull out like an accordion, like so. So I've already put every other card upside down. So I want all of my fronts to have this design. And I want my first hinge on the left side. So I'm going to hinge the first 2 together so that these 2 sides are together. I'm just going to use my art glitter glue because they are such small pieces of fabric. I don't see the need to use fabric glue for this. So I'll just add some glue here. Add my fabric on top. And hinge it to the other side. So there's my first hinge. And I want to add, this is optional because we don't really see a lot of the fabric here, but I do think it looks prettier if we also add fabric on the other side, which is basically our back side. So then we add the next hinge on this side here. So we're always going to alternate, one hinge here and then the next one is going to get the hinges here. And I'm going to do my best to stay approximately in the same height. And again, I'll add them on the other side as well. I have a feeling I lost some. Okay, I don't think I'll have enough. Anyway, I can cut some more. I don't know how I was calculating this. It's probably easier to just have them all laying out like this and to hinge both sides. That makes a lot more sense, Barbara. Because in the end, we can just fold them like we want to fold them, right? Yeah. Let's do that and not make things so complicated. By the way, this is Tim Holtz fabric. Let's do these sides. I need to cut some more of these. And I found the 2 missing ones. They were stuck to my cloth. So I have all of my pieces hinged. So there's one side and there's the other side. So if you do 8 pages like I am doing, you will need 28 little pieces of fabric or tape, whatever you want to use. So now we can fold this. So I'm just folding back and forth and back and forth. And now when we put this in, we already see that just because of the hinges, this is already 3/4 filled up. Of course, the middle has more space because we haven't glued anything in the middle yet, but the sides are already a lot more bulky. I actually wanted to glue the last page onto the back of my tin so that I can then just pull this out like that. Actually, let me pull out like this, right? The back sides will stay as they are and the fronts will be decorated. But now I'm thinking maybe I'll attach it, I don't know, with Velcro or something, so that if for some reason, I can't imagine now what the reason would be, but maybe, but it seems too permanent to just glue that in there. So I will think about that. While editing this video, I realized it was becoming quite lengthy, so I decided to split it into 2 parts. So be sure to check back next week to see which digital downloads from the Digital Collage Club I select and how I incorporate them into this little journal, blending vintage and modern elements seamlessly. Love you guys! Mwah! Mwah!